let people get connected and get started from there. So it will just be about a moment or two before we get completely started.
Hey everybody, who I know and don't know. Nice to almost see you.
Great. Well, welcome to the next in our virtual coffee chats. It's been fantastic to host these, and I'm really excited to dive into the conversation today. I mean, crisis management is just such a topical issue and continuing issue, and it's such a broad concept of what to deal with. So really happy to have everybody joining us for this conversation. And before we get too deep into it, just want to promote a couple things we've got going on. So I'm Brad McCabe with Sponsor Circle, and happy to host these sessions. And we've got another session coming up on February 10th. We've got Reed Trimble and Barry Alexander talking about esports. So Reed Trimble comes from Bad Moon Talent and represents all the esports talent and works with brands to integrate with talent in that space. Barry Alexander comes from the brand side, talking about how to integrate a brand and utilize esports for ROI for your brand. So the information on that will be coming up in the follow-up email to this session. And then additionally, we've got a couple partnered sessions we're doing February 24th with Western Sponsorship Congress. We're going to be running a session on resources. So how to keep yourself focused, how to save some time, and running through a whole variety of resources with you. And then on February 25th, we're going to be hosting a session with Festivals Events Ontario and a couple other partners talking about sponsorship post-pandemic. So I'll send all the links to you in the follow-up email to this session, but wanted to put those on your radar. But welcome to Alan for joining this session today. Alan and I met when Alan was presenting on this very topic at Western Sponsorship Congress a few years ago. And it was really timely for myself because I was in the midst of a crisis element with where I was working at the time. So it was fantastic to be able to learn from the issues and the challenges that were faced by Alan and be able to integrate that into what I'm doing. So happy to share that here. A bit of a bio on Alan, so I'm going to pump Alan up a bit. So she's an energetic and dynamic communications professional with a bold approach to life and business. She's got 3 decades of working in this space, and the essence of Loudmouth Communications, her company, reflects the core of her values, the work ethic, and relentless curiosity. So on that ego boost, I will pass it off to Alan to introduce herself.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't believe when you asked me to do this that you remembered something I said in 2011, because I honestly don't know if I remember what I said in 2011. But the essence of the talk I gave the last time, really, I guess the thing I walked away, because I was talking about crisis, managing crisis in sponsorship, is that like there's such a wide variety of crises that we're talking about. That particular talk was about my experiences going through a stage collapse at a major festival event. But I know today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the, the minor crises, and then certainly some of the more serious things, and the one we're all going through right now, which is a global pandemic crisis. But, I've always said jokingly that we have to prepare. When people ask, what should we prepare for? I said, prepare for the zombie apocalypse, we got to plan for the zombie apocalypse. And now I actually think we should plan for the zombie apocalypse, because we couldn't have guessed what this last year would have thrown at us and all the impacts. So I think it's interesting to see how people are handling it. I've certainly had to really go deep and deal with a lot of different challenges and issues concerning contracts and rescheduled and canceled and postponed events, and all the things that come, all the questions that come now about how do we deal with it and how do we get through it and what's next and where's our crystal ball to guess and all that. So there's a lot of stuff to, like, layers of it that we have to kind of be in it together. It's really about being in it together, I think, because we are in it together.
Yeah, and I think it's such a broad, a broad range of things that happen. Just looking at some of the conversation we're having, and I'll share the screen back. Just looking at issues that come through. You can talk about, the Radiohead concert in 2012 where their stage collapsed just as they were about to go on stage. In the middle of the Cheap Trick concert in 2011 at Ottawa Blues Festival, their stage collapsed with the members of the band on stage and an audience full of people. What's going on with Boy Scouts of America right now? They've got 90,000 abuse cases that they're dealing with. And it's pushed them to the verge of bankruptcy. In fact, I think they have filed for Chapter 11 and are renegotiating what their scenario is going to be. And I've dealt with something similar with Scouts Canada when some historical allegations came up, and it's incredible what you've got to run through. Celebrity's gone wrong. There's a whole variety of things that pop into the news, and not necessarily pick on Robert Asuna as one, but a significant impact to celebrity endorsements, how sponsors are engaged, how the team's engaged. There's a lot of press elements, and things that are more salacious definitely seem to land in the press world longer. And we're dealing with the pandemic now, and my experience back when SARS hit, the impact on Toronto was really significant, and that was a big push to try and deal with that. And now we're looking at a pandemic on a global scale that changes the view of what you can and can't do. And then it's setting up for yourself, Alan, your experience with the tornado or the storm coming through and the impact that it had on your stage. And I can see right on the picture you shared, you've got a brand logo right on the stage.
I said that the particular partner did not ask for that asset in renegotiation. And I know we'll go into this a little bit, but that particular incident had a lot of different kinds of ramifications. It was I guess the perfect storm of a lot of things. For one thing, it went international immediately because Kevin Costner was on the stage when it collapsed. So you have a international Academy Award winning actor and musician who literally was hit by the stage as it fell, and he heroically tore his shirt off and put it around his bandmate that was bleeding on the stage. I mean, that went Rolling Stone, TMZ, international news. So all the pictures and all the footage were shared very quickly. I think before my mom knew, it was already international news. So all of the partners were wrapped up in that, and all of the, there's so many layers of crisis management for that event. Luckily, there was a very, excellent crisis or emergency response plan in place, but it was serious. We lost a family member, and I consider everyone as part of events. In all of our events as family, our festival is a family, all of them, and we lost a fan, Donna Moore. So there was a death. So it wasn't a small crisis; it was a major crisis. But it was also we were living it because it was happening to us, and everyone, including the sponsors, went through it and had a story. And that was part of the resolution, was that everyone had a story. So I'm not sure. Did you want to show the little video clip to set that up?
Yes, I have the video you shared here.
Yeah, just to give context.
I will apologize, there's a bit of language in it.
Yeah, just to kind of take a quick peek. I don't know. I don't think we can hear the audio, but it's... You can imagine the language.
So yeah, there's a bit of language after that, but it just gives you a great sense of, when you're in the moment and the challenges related to that.
Yeah, and that particular day, I mean, we were enjoying a beautiful sunny day, and for my part, I managed the sponsorships for major events. So my role was to start communicating weather that we knew was coming or had been in the hour away vicinity, So I was actually standing on the stage 3 minutes before it fell down. But the wind had started to flap up a bit, and I exited the stage. I waved at Kevin Costner. He was on the other side. I'd just seen him a minute before. I exited and was texting sponsors to get their inflatables and their tents down, because that's part of our protocol, is to let, batten down the hatches. We knew there was a storm. But unfortunately, it was a plow wind, which is I guess a horizontal tornado. It rolled over the site and it took down the stage within a couple of minutes. So we were in a true crisis situation. Within minutes of, the sun was shining and the people were singing, and there was, regular happy festival frivolity. And then all of a sudden we were in the midst of a massive storm and a disaster. So, we immediately knew that the emergency response plan was intact. Before my exit point was blocked by the stage. That's where I was, but we couldn't get out because the other fence was locked, but the fire trucks were already arriving within minutes. So, and we had all of the off-duty nurses and doctors come to triage, and there was the medical center was set up on site. So, we went into major crisis at that point, but all of the pieces were very much intact because the emergency response was first. We then had to regroup, and as a result of that, the emergency protocols strengthened, and my role of executing, muster points and making sure everyone that we have on site was accounted for in subsequent events. But there was a lot of sponsorship involvement in that particular crisis. I actually ended up running crisis communications for that as well, because the agency who was responsible for that the writers weren't on site, but I was there, and I am a senior communications professional. So I actually wrote all of the comms speeches for the media conferences and the talking points and all of that. So it just became this real group effort to execute the crisis plan. There was certainly a few holes, but that's the roles we all kind of had to play.
Yeah, I think one of the big elements is, you've said you had a crisis plan.
Yeah.
And I think from, a lot of organizations I've seen, the crisis plan might be light if it exists. So, what were the key elements you had in the plan that worked well, and what were things that you needed to modify?
Well, there's actually 3 things, and I have this nice document here. The first thing is, I think anywhere where people gather, or it could be a charitable event, a sporting event, a music festival, anywhere where people gather, every event property needs a proper plan. So that was the first thing that was intact, and it was very effective. The second thing is all pre-event is the crisis legal that exists within contracts. My contracts did contain active nature. They call it active nature, act of God. I call it active nature. They include plagues and acts of government. So there's legal and indemnifications that are important pre-event, and also the crisis communication plan. And that differs in the context of this, since we're talking about sponsorship. The crisis communication plan for sponsorship very much in that event involved talking to every partner. And like you said, there was a logo that went international from one of our partners on the stage header. The thing that worked well was that we were transparent, responsive, immediate, and that we all went through it. So regardless, genuine empathy is required. But we're not a really litigious society in Canada, but we certainly could have. There was the fear of everybody suing everybody. And there also is, the fact that there were contract elements that were not executed because the festival was canceled by 6:00 p.m. on a Saturday, and it should have gone till midnight on Sunday. But I will say that not one single partner asked for money back, and not one single partner sued. And I believe that the reason for that is that everybody wanted to be heard and tell their story. And that was the most important thing. Listening and acknowledging and being empathetic and dealing with what we could deal with, but also, everybody went through it. So they couldn't deny that it was serious, because a lot of them actually felt that their life was in danger. It was that serious of a situation. So when you got a bunch of people who are happy to be alive, I guess that helps maybe a little. But I think how it was dealt with, in that we sat down with every single partner and we let them tell their story. We had to hear everybody's story, and it's heartbreaking because it was peril. But I think that really was one of the things that helped, the communicating through the crisis plan and going through the legal and talking about it was very important.
And I guess one of the key elements, and if you're letting people, tell their story, and it's not necessarily, been vetted through you, whether it needs to be vetted or not, as the organizer, I guess that really stresses the need for transparency. Because if you start creating a narrative, and somebody's telling their story, it doesn't fit that narrative, that could run into some pretty significant issues.
Yeah, everybody has their version of it, and I even liken it to a smaller situation where an element of the sponsorship is missed, and I've gone through 3/4 of an event before I found out that the element was missing and no one flagged it. And the first thing I always do is inform the partner and completely come clean about what's happening and how it happened, and take responsibility. Because like I've always said, and people will countless times say, oh, I didn't want to tell you about that because I knew you were busy. And I always said the only time I can fix something before the event is over is while it's happening. We can always be proactive in that situation. But if I don't tell someone there's a problem and I knew it, that's a lie. So I will never have an omission of responsibility in my process. I'm completely transparent and honest, and I believe it has kept partnerships loyal in the long term, regardless of how ugly it is in the moment.
And how have you dealt with, there's a lot of emotions when it comes to a crisis, whatever the crisis is,
Yeah.
and sort of managing it or stepping aside from the emotion and trying to think about the rational?
Well, we're all professionals, and I remember a lady that worked for a pharmaceutical company. I think they had sunscreen on site and some hay fever medicine, and there must have been something going on. I don't even remember why she said it, but she said, "You're so calm." And somebody was freaking out. Like, people freak out. They freak out about lots of things. So we're constantly dodging all of that. But I said, if you see me running, or if you see me losing it, then there's a real problem. Like, even when the stage collapsed, I wanted to go help. The way I did help in the crisis was I took people who were injured to triage, but I wasn't the one running away, because it's my job. That's my family. I'm responsible. It's more than just like being emotional. I suppose that there are lots of feelings we have, but in those moments when there's been big or little things, I know it's my job, and I'm an agent, so I'm representing the property and the clients, the brands, and the agencies. So I'm the middleman. I feel like I have to bring everybody together and maintain that cohesion and still take care of everybody. So I've always considered it like part of my, I guess, my oath to my profession is to really stay present and do my job. But I'm also trained in crisis management, so I guess that's helpful.
Yeah. And then there's a question in the chat, and I think it's relevant to a lot of scenarios, is you're the agent between the property and the brands. How do you balance when people start seeing impact? You've got your brand that's on the stage, and how do you make amends, or whether there's compensation needed moving forward?
Right.
What's been your experience?
Well, I think maybe it's a little different scenario. My actual clients are the properties, and then the brands and the sponsors are the entities that I bring into my client. But I'm there to advocate for the brand, because it's sort of like, if the brand isn't happy, no one's happy. So my process is to advocate for the brand. It doesn't mean the brand always gets what it wants, because there's rules maybe, and you can't be completely flexible, because the property still has to operate according to their procedures and their you know, requirements, but I've always gone to bat for the partner, because that is the long-term relationship that the property relies on me maintaining. So my job is to keep the property, or keep the sponsors happy.
And then have you found, like, when you're drawing up the contracts, I mean, force majeure is such a big conversation right now, you know, especially over the last year, both on, you know, people trying to keep their money, people trying to fight for their money back. Are you seeing, you know, it different from either side, from whether sponsors are doing it, or are you seeing sponsors change the contracts they're engaging in?
Yeah, a little bit. I actually in 2019, just going into 2020, I actually got a 2-page force majeure clause from somebody. And I always thought mine were really, really ironclad, but they listed things that, like, I think they listed zombie apocalypse. I really think they did. But I looked at it, I said, wow, guys, like, this is something, you know? Like, I'm like, who's the lawyer that came up with this piece of art? It was lovely. But, you know, in reality, there needs to be, I guess, you come to agreement on force majeure in the process. And the force majeure clauses are important, very important, because, you know, if act of nature hadn't been in the Big Valley Jamboree clause when the stage collapsed, then we probably would have been giving a lot of money back. But that clause stated that if there was factors or you know, actors not controllable by either party that happens when we're already operating, that no one's at fault. So those things are really important. What happened to us this past year was actually not a plague. It could have been a plague, but we were canceled by act of government. So the clause that was enacted was act of government. And when I went out to the 40 or 50 partners that I work with in the 6 events I work on across Canada, you know, we informed of act of government, and we explained that we couldn't possibly predict if because it happened in April and our events were July, August. So the governments across Canada all called it by, I think, April. So then we had to tell them, look, the government has shut us down. We're not allowed to operate through end of August. So we enacted force majeure. In most cases, if the contract bridged the subsequent years, then in a lot of cases we left it. If it was ending in 2020, we created addendums to bridge to this year. And then in some cases, if they didn't want a bridge contract, then we just keep talking and keeping each other informed about the current situation, because it obviously still isn't resolved. But I have a pile or a file full of addendums to last year's cancellations, postponements, and rescheduled events, because most people have optimism, and that hasn't changed. There's a lot of partners out there still looking to find, they want to know when we're back in business. So, you know, it's good.
Yeah, and I think there's, you know, different ways to approach the force majeure conversation. And I can think of, you know, one organization that, not sponsor related, this is on the personal side, but it was, my kids are in a program and they had our money for the program. And rather than contact everybody and inform them of all the, how things were playing out and that they were going to hold the force majeure, they changed their website, didn't tell anybody, kept all the money. And the vitriol that came on social media and everything related to them was huge. And I think, you know, something I've heard relative to crisis communications is the crisis is one thing, and then how you respond to it is actually how it can be remembered more so, or prolonged.
Definitely. Well, and I was talking to someone actually last week or early this week even. What day is it? Wednesday. I think it was Monday. And, you know, they asked, how's it going about this coming year? And we talked about how difficult it is because we don't know all the answers yet. And there's a question in the comments I'll address in a second about how do you deal with someone asking for 50% off. But I said, you know, don't think that I've just started talking to our partners. We've been talking all along. We've been talking since April constantly about how to fix it, how to change it, how to get around it, how to reinvent. So there's all this stuff going on that no one sees right now about how do we get back in the game, and how do we start a new game? How do we figure this out. Like, is there a scenario? What are the scenarios? What's viable? So we've got some models that we're actually building right now in Canada and the US to bring, I work in obviously a lot in live music. So, we're bringing back live music, and trust me, there are a lot of partners on side. So I've got so much excitement out there in the partnering world, because we've been talking all along, and I finally had something good to bring them. So they're like, yeah, let's do this. So we're actually creating some pretty dynamic partnerships right now with the new concept that I'm building with some of my partners. So it's exciting. It's, festivals will come back. And to address that question about what do you do when someone asks for 50% off, here's how I'm dealing with it, because I've also been asked to give 50% off. The answer is no, but in a nice way, in the sense that we don't know if 50% off is fair at this point, because none of the governments, and that will likely be the force majeure clause again, none of the governments have decided what the picture looks like yet. So say we're in a live event where the site holds 15,000 people. If the government says you can only have half, then does your sponsor deserve 50% off? My argument is you have to look at the total attendance, historical attendance, and often you don't sell out. So you can't say 50% off if your site holds 15,000, but you usually only get 8,000. So they don't deserve 50% off. So we have to come to agreement when we know the real time scenario. So I've got a few partners that may ask for a discount, and I've said we will be open to, as good partners with each other, we will be open to that frank conversation when we know the true picture. But before that, there's no way I would put that into a contract or agree to it or sign it.
And I'd say a lot of elements of that really require you to understand your value, doing evaluation of what you're offering the partner. And sometimes you need to spell it out, because if you've got something that's ongoing, so using the concert as a perfect example, they've had media benefit, they've got the pre-promotion benefit, they've got a lot of the hospitality benefits. So if they miss out on one portion of that, is that 50% or is it 10%?
Yeah, well, and one of the partners that's asking, their part of their their metrics is volume, because they sell a beverage. So we can't possibly know if they will have a 50% reduction in volume. My guess is if we are operating at 50% capacity at one of the event sites, they'll still have really good volume, because people will be excited to come back. 50% of capacity may be pretty close to what the previous, event attendance was in the first place. And they will be back, with great programs and promoting their products and making sure that they're, marketing great, because everybody is so excited to get back at it right now. It's not just the people that attend events that are sad. The brands, even the ones that are still thriving, they're missing the fun. They want back out they want to be with their festival families too. They love that part of their business where they get to interact. That's why XM is so popular. We're creating memories and sharing experiences. It's more than just watching a show.
Yeah, there's a question that popped up direct to me, just asking about planning and trying to renew contracts and looking at what's been going on with the pandemic and the not knowing when events are going to come back. And kind of my point of view on it is your audience is still there. So if you run, say, a triathlon program or your Spartan races, all of that audience is still training. They're still actively doing things. They haven't gone away. So the fact that you're not talking to them just because you're not running an event could be a loss on your end, and it becomes a great opportunity for brands to tap into your digital communications, your social communications. I think there's a lot you can bring to brands. But how are you dealing with the organizations you're working with and the fact that their events are so up in the air?
Well, the reality is events are business. So, whether even the charitable events are still part of a business structure. Sporting events, music festivals, concerts and tours, every behind every event are so many layers of business. And I wrote an article actually about how many people it affects, you know, from the guy who rents the tents and the porta potties to the, you know, the agents, and especially the artists who aren't performing. So, you know, like, we're all proceeding as if we are going to be operational, because right now we have to. The business requires us to plan and proceed, because even if there is, like, we can't guess what the scenario is, but once we know the scenario, and there will be a go no go for all of the businesses from a financial model. But if we don't plan right now, and I don't talk to partners, and we don't have any of our contract steps executed, we'll be caught off guard down the road, and we know how difficult that would be. So it's all proceeding on my events. We are proceeding as if we are executing, and just like last year, we'll be waiting for I guess the rules to be spelled out to us, which there will be impact and there will be rules, and the answer could still be no. we don't know, but we have to proceed as if it's happening.
And you know, there's another question in the chat, but you know, it's probably relevant to this, is, you know, how are you adjusting sponsor values if you're adjusting what the event looks like, whether you need to have, you know, social distancing, or you need to run some form of hybrid?
Yeah, there's lots of scenarios that are, you know, that are in play right now for keeping people safe. In reality, every province has different guidelines, and we will be following provincial guidelines for distance, masking, sanitation, crowd control. There's going to be a lot of different things. And, you know, when I hold up this emergency response document, part of that will now be a whole other section created to address safety protocols pertaining to all of this, like the pandemic response and the spread of, you know, a virus that's impacted our world so much. So, you know, there's going to be changes, and I think there may be permanent. You know, if you just think from a personal perspective, with our personal space and our personal habits, that's going to go along with us for quite some time, even when the threats diminish. So as organizations, it's important to have those procedures in place, but all of those things are important. Every aspect of the emergency response plan is important. So this will just be another aspect of it.
Has it changed your sponsor values at all?
Not yet, because there's too many unknowns. The X factor of what that could translate to is a complete mystery right now. So in the new events that I'm planning, working with a team on for the newly approved, fully health vetted events that we're planning to start executing in April. No, it's actually interesting because the attendance will be much lower, but the values are remaining static, because we're bringing different kinds of value in, and we're bringing back something that's so valuable to people that they want to be a part of it. So there's maybe more value now in some cases.
Yeah, and I think, you know, addressing the question, the fact that they're being forced to, or asked to cut their value in half because they've gone from 4 stages down to 2, it really valuing, you know, what you're offering them, and finding other opportunities, because there will be new sponsorable assets that pop up in terms of sanitation, and maybe you're handing out masks or something along those lines, which just weren't there before and weren't branded.
Yeah, and I mean, just like a partner who didn't want their banner on the stage after it fell down, and, you know, like the value of that partnership didn't change either. It probably went up because we created different assets for that partner. If you handle your relationships properly, and we are in the relationship business, the communication is so important, and the relationship we have with our partners who become like our family. You know, we're all in business, but we're in the people business, and we're in the relationship business. And if those relationships are intact, then you find the new ways of, you know, of rethinking things and creating new opportunities as opposed to running away from it or saying we can't fix it. There's always something that will be new. And this scenario, we're not through it yet, so we don't know the answers. But I would be, if I was giving advice to someone, I'd be very, especially a property, I would be reluctant to say just go slash your prices, because I don't think we're there yet. But be open to that, you know, really real and honest answer that since we don't know, we're in this together and we'll tackle it together as soon as we can.
And I think it's one of those elements that, you know, if your knee-jerk reaction is emotionally to drop prices to keep everybody happy, you're never going to be able to move back up. Trying to increase the price back up is, I'll find, you know, it's such a challenge unless you've already got it built into the contract, that it's almost better to provide more value elsewhere to augment that.
And I like, it's so little of it is about what the price tag is. I mean, I know at the end of the day, we all agree on a price for things, and then that's where the negotiation and contract process ends, is when everyone is mutually happy and we put our lovely signatures on things. But we're dealing with so many intangibles when it comes to some of these things. Like, it's not just about the dollar figure. So that's why I try not to make it about the dollar figure at this point, because we still have so many hurdles to jump over before we start talking about being the, you know, if the property does feel it's fair and the partner is asking, then you have to come to a new agreement and maybe do an addendum for this year, because we all want to keep our partners, and the events want to proceed. They want to be back in 2022 and onward. So we're all going to have to just navigate it. There's no roadmap for this, but being open, honest, transparent, all of the things, responsive, maintaining those lines of communication, like not just going back towards the end and saying, no, we're not dropping our price, or, hey, do you remember me? I didn't talk to you for 8 months. Like that, those are bad things. But, you know, we just have to keep talking to each other and literally working our way through it together. It's collaborative, 100% collaborative.
And you were showcasing the document you've created. I mean, how many contingencies do you prepare for, and how much of a time investment is that?
Yeah, and I can't take full responsibility for any of this. I think Diane from Camrose Regional Exhibition is on this, is watching, and her team, even prior to when she took over at the organization, you know, worked through the emergency response. I consider that the document that I utilize, and the processes that I, you know, I guess the scenarios that I can respond to or recommend, we're certainly vetted through a process with a lot of people, emergency response people, policing, event security. So there's a lot of different things from the minor to the major. I mean, a lot of us, because on that particular event site had already gone through a massive, you know, crisis situation with a staged collapse, a weather event, a death. That team knew what that felt like. But, you know, we're talking grass fires and illnesses and all sorts of things in between. So like there's a great big list of potential hazards that could impact an event. You know, for some, maybe like if, say you're in a building, I kind of joke about this, but like if you have a building and a partner is involved in the building, then, you know, your partners surrounding your building, we just happen to work outside, but the same things could happen inside. You could have a partner that's involved in a building that burns down, you know, all the assets burn. Still could make news. You could have a riot, or like, look at all the things that are happening right now. You could have all these things. We've always listed them, but it's about working through the scenarios, the worst case scenarios, and being prepared for them, and what the responses are to the different levels of and the impacts. So the planning is really important from the emergency response. Obviously, all of our legal is in place when we get to a site, and you really do need to have that the crisis communication plan too from the property. But I think all of the you know, the brands need one too. I encounter a lot of teams that come on site, and I ask them to, you know, we've already gone through 2 different tests of the emergency plan. You know, I have an emergency plan in place. They have maps to know where their muster points are. They know that we will be testing the, you know, this is a crisis, meet me at the muster point. You know, we practice that. But a lot of them don't have their own team plan. And I'm always surprised by that, because it's important, you know, when we see them setting up and you're like, did you read your emergency plan? They're like, no. And I said, well, you got to, you know, secure this and do that. And they're like, you know, some of them don't really understand the reasons that they should also have protocols, because they have to keep their team safe too, right? Like they have to know how to know where everybody is if something bad happens. And a lot of them don't even have those steps in place. So there's so many layers of training maybe that needs to happen so that everybody is prepared when these scenarios occur, that I don't see widespread existence of those plans. And I think it's really important for them to be there. It's something I always talk about.
And then how broad do you start getting into? You start to, you know, somebody has a heart attack on site, you have a natural disaster, a child goes missing, you know, do you action all of those?
Well, anything that doesn't require any mass involvement. I mean, there's always, every site has security and procedures for dealing with those kinds of things. If it doesn't impact my area, I wouldn't be involved. In certain events that I'm involved with, we have a private chat where we have an app where we're being given the different levels, like we're on, you know, this alert and this could happen. But it's just an alert. It's not a, you know, it goes from alert to warning to, you know, we're in progress, where we enact the plan for that particular level of threat. But no, not everything. It would have to impact my area in order for me to be brought into that, and it would have to impact the sponsors and the teams that are on site to be involved in those.
And then when you're in crisis, you know, do you have a team you work with? Do you start expanding that out? Like when do you start bringing in, you know, I've seen organizations where board members start going off to the right field and having different conversations, and sponsors are going to have their own views. How do you consolidate all that?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that too, about one of the situations that you had where you had a plan and then someone in the organization decided they had their own plan.
Yep.
I guess that's a bit human nature, right? And it's difficult. I mean, and I guess we're all in the same industry, you know, as I was even managing that, because I was thrown into the crisis comms part of it, even though it wasn't my particular job, but I was trained in it, so I helped. You know, the language was important about, you know, because everybody was really impacted. Like I said, we all feel like every single person that attends our events is part of our family. Like we were feeling that so hard, and we're so emotional ourselves, but as you said, try to keep it together. But we still had to use the language that was appropriate for the situation. Instead of calling it a disaster or a crisis, really every single person I was ushering through the immediacy, the immediate steps was to discuss it as an incident. And that's hard because it was an incident, but it was a terrible, terrible incident. But you know, the language was required because you don't know what the aftermath's going to be. So getting everybody on the same page quickly is important. That's why the plan should exist, so that everybody's aware of what the language will be if it happens, so that when they get there, they're not guessing or shocked that you need to call it something that's not in your heart or in your emotions.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it's that reaction time that you know, and I was explaining the incident that I had happen where, you know, organizationally we had a comms plan, we were working through it, and had essentially, in news-wise and how much it was spread out, we had it, you know, dealt with, and it was pretty transparent. And then we had a volunteer in the organization who decided they wanted to come out with a different viewpoint, and that stretched it from a couple of weeks of conversation to months of being dragged out, because all of a sudden the organization, people were looking at the organization going, well, why is there 2 stories? And then that created all kinds of complexity with brands and sponsors, to the point that we got blacklisted by a number of sponsors And that created a significant amount of issue trying to, keep everybody happy, get them to realize where where their scenario was. And I've had a person send a question in about, sponsors demanding money back. And I think it really comes down to working with those sponsors, being transparent, explaining what your plan is, and how you can potentially spread the benefits. So maybe they lost some elements this year, but how can we pick that up in the following year? I don't know if you've had similar scenarios.
Were you able to recover the money in that scenario? Like you had a different, that's one of those ones where partners may walk away because of really, difficult optics. In your scenario with that situation, did you have some partners that left? There weren't any partners that left. So just for the general public, this is something we were talking about beforehand. I worked with Scouts Canada when all the abuse cases were coming back from the 70s and 80s. And it was a significant issue. And organizationally, we were looking at all of our partners who were engaged, and I would say 5 or 6 of them just said, take our names off everything. And they didn't pull their money back because we had very frank conversations about how we were dealing with it, but we did create some extensions. So there were a number of partners who were in 12-month relationships that became 18 months. So that's a bit of a balancing from the organization. And sometimes I think financially that becomes a challenge, and you just have to figure out how you're going to deal with it, because the impact of having them completely walk away could be greater than dealing with, okay, well, it's going to be 6-month extension. Mm-hmm. And after the stage collapse incident, we had no loss of partnerships, which I think is a really great testament to the team. It also speaks to, I guess, the Canadian way, I think, a little. But it also, I believe that particular incident, because everyone uniquely went through it in person, it wasn't as if it happened to someone else and they watched it from afar. Everyone was actually there. The majority of the decision makers are on site. All of the teams are on site. So there's personal impact by every person. And after we got through the process of, listening, that was really the part of the healing of a traumatic event. And I told you that I don't think we could hear the audio on that clip, but the wind sound still makes me trigger, because I was in it. It doesn't live outside of me. It resides in my experience, and it makes me emotional because I have never heard anything like that before. We were in the middle of like the eye of it. It fills you in a real sensory way. There's no escaping it. But the after effect of dealing with the listening and the feelings is that you have resolution, and that's why they didn't walk away. They felt it was resolved, and the resolution wasn't give me my money back. The resolution was, I feel heard. I feel that we're very fortunate. We know you had a plan that worked to keep as many people safe as possible. And those were the important things. They felt that we took care of them and that we listened to them, and that the resolution was empathetic. The only thing we could offer was empathy. We couldn't offer anything else. So, in that particular case, that was the resolution, was that process to get to resolution for not losing anybody. In this case, like the pandemic situation, it's like a passive incident to a certain extent, because it's not traumatic in the sense that we're all similarly experiencing a traumatic event and going through it in real time. Like, we're all sitting back in our in our home offices now, dealing with the after effects of an ongoing situation. But I haven't had a lot of people walk away. Like, I don't know, like we can't see everybody's face right now to see if there's nodding, but nobody's really walking away right now. There's people who wouldn't sign the paperwork, or that their internal policy is no events or no commitments until we know the answer, and that's fair. But for me personally, I mean, I deal with so many different companies because I'm an agency with cross Canada events, literally coast to coast, that I work with on the property side. Nobody's talking about never coming back or walking away for good. Like, it's not something that we did. It's not something we can control, but how we're talking through it and being present and being innovative and, again, transparent and trying to do our best, like, those things matter. But because we're all in it together, we're also going to be seeking solutions and answers together. So I don't see a lot of people walking away right now. It doesn't mean we've got everything locked down, because we can't. It's fluid. But I guess there's good news in that. Like, if your relationships are intact and you've tried really hard, you might not maintain all of the business. It'll take some time to come back because there's some impact to people's businesses and budgets and things. But I don't see a lot of them walking away. Just like you obviously had great relationships because they didn't leave, and that's important.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things. And I think, you know, there was one advanced question just asking about, you know, how brands deal with, you know, you being in crisis versus how you deal with being in crisis as a property. You know, I think about, you know, brands who will sponsor a team and they get associated to some elements of an athlete, and if that athlete has an issue, all of a sudden, you know, they've got some associated brand issues, and it's just sort of, you know, what can you do? And I know you've had some celebrity issues, and looking at the time, and there's been some requests. The Dennis Rodman one is probably a good start.
Well, and when you said celebrity problems, Tiger Woods comes to mind, right? But he's still out playing golf, and I believe he still wears the same golf shirt. So, you know, there is a path through every bad situation, even if it's really at the time seems like impossible to overcome. But yeah, I've done a lot of work because I worked in media for 10 years prior to starting my company 19 years ago. That's why you say 3 decades. It's hard, or 3 decades, hard to believe that you go into get through your 3rd decade of doing something. But I was doing sponsorship and entertainment for a professional sports team at one point a number of years ago. And we had all sorts of different sponsored appearances, and one of them was Dennis Rodman. I think it was before he became friends with Kim Jong-un. But who knows, maybe that's why I couldn't get his attention. He might have been texting his buddy Kim. But Dennis got on site and clearly had not been informed by his agency what his roles and responsibilities were. I think he perceived that he was there to wave at the crowd and go and sit and, you know, watch the game. But he had been contracted to be the entertainment, like the host. So he had a script that he didn't read prior. He had responsibilities that he refused to perform. And we paid him a lot of money. So he, you know, in order for him to get the check, he needed to do what he was hired to do. But he was defiant. And this is a gigantic human being. Like, I would say he's like 6'10". I don't know. I'm 5'10", but he's still gigantic. And at one point he was refusing so adamantly that I actually had to get up in his face. I was within an inch of Dennis in his face, up under his cap, trying to get him to look me in the eye to tell him that he had to go out and do his job. I wasn't afraid of Dennis, but he was really not, like, he was not feeling it. He wasn't on his game by any means. He was really refusing to do what we'd hired him to do. So, you know, I was in an argument with him backstage or behind the scenes, and he was furious. And I knew my client, which was the sports team, was going to be looking terrible if he refused to go out. And I knew that the sponsors who had sponsored the game were going to be furious. And, you know, we would have not given them what they paid for if he simply refused to go. Somehow, by the will of me pleading with him to go and do his job, he took the microphone. He mumbled his way through it. I don't think he said one thing that I scripted him to say. But every time I put the microphone in his hand, he walked out and pumped the crowd up and said something. So we mitigated it a bit, but you know, usually you don't have to be so ferocious in demanding that someone perform their duties, but he literally wasn't going to. And you know, it was a bit intimidating too, because he's a, you know, a very imposing figure, and he's, you know, he's a famous dude, and he's there, he made it there, but just the complete refusal was really difficult to deal with. So I won't ever forget Dennis. I think he's probably already forgot me maybe 5 minutes later.
Well, and I mean, that's the challenges of the crises they're so varied.
Yeah.
You know, as you're telling that, I'm just, you know, reminded of something we were talking about earlier, that, you know, ran a celebrity meet and greet event. It was a gala dinner, and I was telling you that, you know, the 5 people who were on stage were reminiscing and telling stories, and it wasn't meant to be a roast, but it ended up turning into a pretty significant roast. And one of the celebrities got up and walked out. And it just, you know, how do you manage that? You've got sponsors there, you've got people who bought tables, and trying to work through that. It's a lot of mitigation after the fact.
Well, the good news is most of the time it turns out really well. I obviously work in live music a lot, so it's a lot of musicians, and 99.9% of the people we work with are gracious and wonderful, and you know, they perform their duties and they don't cause any troubles. It's just that like small percentage that goes wrong when it comes to the celebrity stuff. But yeah, scandals and all sorts of things in between, like the things we have to deal with, man, it's pretty exciting, but it's also, you know, keeps you on your toes for sure.
I guess, you know, just as we're wrapping up, I mean, what are your recommendations for, you know, pre-planning and then in crisis planning, kind of your top line?
Well, I guess the biggest recommendation is to have a plan. So, you know, I've learned a lot of this as I go, but the benefit of experience is having gone through some of these things. So, you know, find some resources if you don't have them yourself. And I think I told you before that coming into this, I realized that people in our community may, you know, see the benefit of having a crisis plan review. And so I've put that service up on my Loudmouth Communications website. And I'll when you do your follow-up, I've got a promo code for Coffee Chat that people, if they want to have me do the review of the 3 elements, the emergency response, legal, and the crisis communications plan, I can review it. And then if we want to move forward, that we could do that. I can do that as a service. But you know, internally you can go through this process or find other experts that can help. But I think having the plans and doing the planning is really essential, because you can't make up for it if you're in crisis and you don't have one.
Yeah, and I think that's the plan and the communications elements are, you know, they're so key, because if you just jump to legal, all of a sudden everybody gets kind of their backs up. So you really need to have that transparency and conversation.
Yeah, and all of that's in place long before. So, you know, we all know what the legal says and we've agreed to it. Like I said, that's once you get to that point, you're all pretty kumbaya, because you've agreed what the documents say. That doesn't mean that there's not stuff to mitigate afterwards if we end up with a situation or an incident. But having the pre-planning is very essential, in my opinion, because you just can't possibly deal with it in real time without knowing what the map is and the way through it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Alan. I mean, there's so much, you know, conversation that can go on. So trying to rush this through in an hour, it's been great. We've covered quite a bit. You know, really appreciate, you know, you bringing back all of those elements that I remember you presenting, you know, a couple of years ago. I won't say how long ago when we first met, but I just found it, you know, really insightful, and it did stick with me. And for the fact that you know, conversation that I saw in one session, I remembered years later, meant that it was impactful. So definitely want to thank you for being here. We've got a follow-up email that I'll send out that'll have a link with the video, which will be housed on our website. And it'll have the code if you want to take advantage of some additional conversation with Alan or talk to myself. Both of our contacts will be on there. And then our next session is February 10th, focusing on esports and brand engagement with Reid Trimble and Barry Alexander. So happy to share that and look forward to having you come on board. And allow the last conversation to be yours, Len.
Yeah, well, I thank you as well, because I know when you saw that presentation that I did, I remember the gasp in the room when they realized I was talking about a real crisis. You know, like there's so many varying degrees of crises, but like I think it's important to talk about this stuff, and we're all in it together. So it's better to at least share experiences. And for anybody, I know there's a few people who've left, but you know, I'm happy to take a phone call anytime to talk through things. And if people don't need a formal review or formal, you know, help with things, but I think it's important for us to know we're all part of the same community and to be there for each other, because that's really what it's all about.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye guys.